Hey everyone, and welcome back for another deep dive. Today we're taking a look at how a whole country approaches teaching a particular subject. That is the curriculum for Wales,
Okay.
and specifically how they approach teaching chemistry.
Interesting.
Now, you might be thinking chemistry, that sounds a little dry. But trust me, it is quite fascinating the way that they are approaching this.
Yeah.
We are going to be looking at some excerpts from official guidance and documents
Okay.
from the curriculum for Wales to give you some insight into how this is all working.
All right. Well, I'm excited to dig in.
Me too.
What have we got?
So the curriculum for Wales
Mhm.
is built on these things called statements of what matters,
Okay.
and there are 6 of them. And they're all interconnected. And
Yeah.
they all kind of aim at achieving the 4 purposes of the curriculum.
Right. So it's kind of like a web where everything's connected
Yeah.
to create a well-rounded
Yeah.
education system.
Yes. And when it comes to chemistry, we're looking at statement of what matters 4, and it basically says matter and the way it behaves defines our universe and shapes our lives.
Deep.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it might sound kind of deep, but like think about it. Everything around us is made of matter.
Right. It's kind of like a fundamental building block.
Exactly.
Yeah. Well, everything.
So the curriculum goes beyond just stating that. The universe and living things are composed of matter.
Right.
What's interesting is the emphasis on matter's behavior.
So it's not just about knowing what things are made of, but how those things
Right.
work and interact and change.
Yes. So it's less about memorizing the periodic table and more about understanding how those elements
Yeah.
work in the real world.
Exactly.
Yeah.
How they affect us
Yeah.
in our daily lives.
So the curriculum wants students to understand how matter's behavior determines properties of materials, how we use natural resources, and how we create new substances.
So like practical applications of
Yeah.
chemistry.
Think about baking a cake. You are combining ingredients, which is matter, in very specific ways. And through chemical reactions, you're creating something totally new
That's a good way to look at it.
and delicious.
Yeah.
It's more interesting than I remember chemistry being.
Then just memorizing formulas and equations.
Yeah, exactly. So
Yeah.
it's not all about practical applications.
Yeah.
Though you mentioned earlier this interconnectedness.
So that's where it gets really fascinating. They bring in this idea of curiosity and inquiry. And that actually links back to statement of what matters 1.
Which basically means encouraging learners to ask why all the time.
Yeah, to question things.
Yeah.
To not just accept facts blindly, but to actually try and understand why things are the way they are.
Yeah, so it's about fostering a love of learning and problem solving, not just memorizing facts and figures.
Exactly.
Okay, but how do they actually make that happen in the classroom?
So this is where it gets really cool. They emphasize hands-on inquiry-based learning.
Okay, so less textbooks.
Less textbooks. More experimentation.
Experiments.
Yes.
Yeah.
For our cake analogy again.
Yeah.
Imagine students actually baking a cake, observing the changes, maybe even experimenting with the ingredients.
Right?
They're not just reading about chemical reactions. They're experiencing them.
They're seeing it happen
Yeah.
in real time.
Yeah. And that's a lot more engaging for students.
Absolutely.
But of course,
Yeah.
learning about chemistry is a process.
It's a journey. It's not a destination. It's
Yeah.
not just you bake a cake and suddenly you're a chemist.
Yeah, you don't go from baking a cake to
Yeah.
developing life-saving medicine.
Right.
How does the curriculum for Wales address that progression of learning?
That's a good question. And they do this through these things called principles of progression,
Okay.
which are basically guidelines on how schools can help students gradually build their knowledge
Yeah.
and skills in chemistry.
Okay, so can you give me an example of that?
Yeah. So, for example, a principle of progression might be
Yeah.
you start with simple chemical reactions like mixing baking soda and vinegar, and you see the fizzy reaction.
Yeah. And then as students get older, they can move on and explore more complex reactions like acids and bases.
Yeah, so it's like building blocks.
Right, exactly.
They'll
yeah.
start simple and then add complexity over time.
Right.
Okay. You mentioned something else earlier called descriptions of learning. What are those?
So these are like even more detailed guiding principles. It's almost like a roadmap for teachers to plan and develop their chemistry curriculum.
Okay.
They'll provide specific examples and considerations for each age group and skill level to help teachers create engaging and effective learning experiences.
Wow. So the curriculum for Wales is very comprehensive. It lays out the big ideas, the progression of learning. It offers detailed guidance for teachers. But is it all perfect? I mean, is there anything about this approach?
That's a really good question, and this is something to think about as you explore the curriculum for Wales further. While this approach is really innovative
Yeah.
and engaging, it could also be demanding for teachers. They need the resources and support to design these inquiry-based lessons and to cater to all the different learning styles.
Yeah, so it's one thing to have this great curriculum on paper, but it's another thing to
Sure.
implement it effectively in the classroom.
Absolutely.
And that leads to another point I want to make is the emphasis on real-world application
Mhm.
is great,
Yeah.
but it also raises questions about how this curricula might influence future scientists and innovators. Will this hands-on, inquiry-driven approach spark a passion for chemistry in young minds? Will it lead to groundbreaking discoveries and technological advancements?
Wow. Those are some big questions.
Yeah, it does raise a lot of questions. So the curriculum for Wales takes a very holistic and hands-on approach to teaching chemistry. It's not just about memorizing facts. It's about understanding how chemistry shapes our world and encouraging students to explore and experiment.
And I think that's a great summary. It really captures the essence of what they're trying to do.
It's much more interesting
Yeah.
than I remember chemistry being.
Yeah, absolutely.
So we've given you a lot to ponder today. What do we have coming up next time?
Well, stay tuned because we have a whole other set of deep dives
Yeah.
planned.
I'm excited for those. Until then, happy exploring.